Hello, everyone. I'm Smita Sharma. Welcome to yet another conversation in our series called Let's Talk Policy that we bring for you from the Kautilya School of Public Policy in Hyderabad. And, where we try and take a deep dive into subject matters of importance. And I think today we have a topic which is very relevant, which is timely, especially given the kind of circumstances around us and all the news that is dominating the headlines. Because if we talk about the economic scenario across the world, while there is the economic inflation that we are talking about, the rising food crisis, but if you look at the cryptocurrencies market, globally, this too, in 2022, this has really been in a turmoil. Now, those of you and a lot of our participants who are not really students of Kautilya, but external scholars, external students, people who delve into cryptos and all kinds of virtual assets, you do see that the kind of sharp decline that we are observing in crypto markets in terms of the sharp falls as well, and in particular of course with FTX, one of the world's largest crypto exchanges, there we have seen a complete downward spiral. Now the estimates suggest that from November 6th onwards alone, there's almost been a collapse of $260 billion of crypto value. How do we really understand this tumult? But more importantly, where does India stand on crypto? So far, of course, we have seen indications that India is in favor of a ban. The Reserve Bank of India has time and again expressed its reservations, its serious concerns when it comes to the security systems around the crypto ecosystem itself. Just on 11th of November, we saw that meeting happen between the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, as well as the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who was in India, and cryptocurrency regulations were also discussed during that meeting. The RBI Governor Shaktikant Das, as well as the US Federal Reserve Chairman Powell, were also present in that meeting. And in 1st of November, in fact, earlier in the month, Nirmala Sitharaman had also indicated that crypto will be one of those unfinalized priorities, particularly in a year in 2023, when India will be hosting the G20 summit. India has just taken over the presidency. So to try and understand today really what is at stake here for cryptocurrencies, for India in particular, well, I'm joined by the experts who will try and answer all the questions that you have. For those of you who are attending our webinar, feel free to drop in your name and question and the panelists that you're addressing these questions to in our chat box. I have with me Dr. Zaki Qureshey. He is the Director General for the Hyderabad Security Cluster. Now, this is actually India's first cybersecurity cluster that was formed in collaboration with the government of Telangana, government of India, under the leadership of its founding fathers. And it's also formulated with the help of a Dutch cluster, which is called the Hague Security Delta, which is one of the largest cybersecurity, in fact, groups in the world. He is on Twitter as Zaki Qureshey, Qureshey, for those of you who want to engage with him there. Thank you so much, Dr. Qureshey, for joining us here.
Hi, good evening.
Yes, I'll just quickly introduce the other two panelists also, and then we'll start the discussion. I have Prashant Surana Jain with me. He is the co-founder and MD for Snapper Future Tech. Snapper Technologies, this is a blockchain. It deals with artificial intelligence. It's a cybersecurity focused company. And I think, as Prashant rightly mentions in his bio, that he's a serial blockchain entrepreneur, because if you look at his CV, you get to understand as to why it is the case. He's on Twitter as Bitcoin Man in India. Welcome to the webinar, Prashant.
Yeah, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. And last but not the least, I have Meghana Bal. She is a fellow at the ECR Center, somebody who is a prolific, in fact, scholar of the subject. She writes frequently across national media publications. She just had an article out in the Hindustan Times on the data protection bill as well, something that, again, we will be discussing very soon in the next few days itself. Let me, in fact, try and get a sense first before we go into, the specific parts of it today. Meghna, give us a sense when we talk about India and the crypto market, looking at the global sort of the crypto share, where does it stand? What is the demographic suggesting? How big is this market that we are talking about?
Right. So there's nothing in terms of hard data, but actually just today or a couple of days ago, a working paper came out from BIS that said that India accounted for the third largest downloads of crypto-related apps after the US, and I'm forgetting what the second country was. So there was clearly a lot of excitement about this market, within the retail environment in India. And there have been reports from chain analysis as well, where I think we fall maybe third or fourth in terms of what it deems crypto adoption, but its methodologies are quite opaque. So I wouldn't rely on that data. But definitely, yeah, India was, I would say, a heavyish adopter of this ecosystem, both from a user perspective and from a business perspective as well, right? Something like 250 to 350 startups in this space over the last few years. And after the RBI judgment came out, a significant amount of capital floated to those startups as well, in anticipation of what would be a less rocky regulatory environment. Of course, that has not come to pass. Beyond that, I think we need to, like, since we are getting into the discussion of regulation of crypto, I think we need to understand why we are front loading regulation in crypto Web 3.0, when it took us so long to regulate the existing, what is considered the existing iteration of the internet, right? So Web 2.0, for instance, really regulation started with it, started on arguably in the late 90s with the Communications Decency Act in the US, where essentially there was an exemption granted to online intermediaries for, anything that users posted on their, use their platforms to post. So they were granted from any liability there. And it is only now, or just over 25 years from the introduction of the internet and internet safe harbors, that there are considerable regulatory clampdowns that we are seeing in the online world. So why are we comparatively more wary about Web3? So first, it is, of course, that we are moving from a digital ecosystem where information was just currency. So data, was the kind of underpinning notion of value, whereas now, as opposed to one that is underpinned by stores of value itself. So there's intrinsic value to crypto, as opposed to where there was the value was notional and inherent and had to be derived, and a lot of investment required to derive value from it. And we are moving from a digital medium of products primarily. There's a product ecosystem of apps to one concerned with the notion of ownership, right? So a quick illustration is the purported ownership of data generated by activity that Web3 will enable. So everything is a more direct line of ownership, including with crypto assets, that emanates from the concept of crypto and Web3. So such constructs trigger considerations around propertization of the online world and necessitate thinking at the very least about considerations around rights, claims, securities, etc. and security.
Meghna, we will touch upon, some of those aspects also that you've talked about. Let me go to Dr. Zaki Qureshey. Dr. Qureshey, again, before I go into the specifics also, this year, earlier in the budget speech, we saw Nirmala Sitharaman announce that basically the income from the transfer of virtual assets would be taxed at 30%. But then subsequently, during the budget session itself, Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, also clarified that taxing the virtual assets does not mean that the government is legalizing it. Currently, how do you see the status of crypto in India? What are the conversations that you've been picking up with policymakers on the subject?
Well, what I think at this point of time is there's nothing to panic at this point of time. India is a pretty large market. Specifically, we have, as our earlier speaker was saying, that we are one of the third leading users of crypto. I mean, we have several such accounts online. But what is required for India to streamline this is basically what we lack is nothing but the regulation. So India should immediately start regulating the framework, which is very important. It happened a couple of times in the parliament, and now it's going to come up in the session again. But India, if you ask me, let me give you a little highlight about the way it's been handled. The first IT Act, which was enacted, was in the year 2000. Just think about this. Since 2022, there are hardly, I think, 200 plus convictions which had happened for a country the size of India. So what it means is even the IT Act had several amendments to follow. And what it requires at the length and breadth or the east, west, north, south of the country is basically awareness, which is the dirt need, which is lacking at this point of time. Second, now there is a huge shift in the technology revolution. The 5G is started implementing. The government has given nod and all that. But 5G, if you talk about 2018 was the year when it got launched officially in the United States by Verizon. And now it's 2022, we endorsed, and I think everything takes time. 2023 is the actual time we will start using 5G at large. Now, coming back to crypto regulation, we don't have a regulation in place. We don't have a digital personal data protection bill, which recently is yet to pass. But yeah, there is a lot of hue and cry in that bill also, that what needs to be added, what needs to be amended. It's being circulated at this point of time. And if you ask me, what matters is we need a security framework also in place, which we seriously lack at this point of time. And if you talk about the index part of Global Innovation Index or Global Cybersecurity Index, India ranks above 40 always. For a country like India, the kind of internet users, I think we are currently the highest number of internet users in the world. So what is required is a stringent framework in place. Without that, everything is loosened. I mean, if you ask me, according to the National Crime Records data, almost 90% of the cases, the courts are pending. And if you talk about cybercrime cases, more than 60% of the cases are pending. So what does it indicate? That we are not ready? So for cryptocurrency, I think India shouldn't ban. I say, and the industry also talks about it at large, that India shouldn't ban. And the kind of when Nirmala Sitharaman announced it, that let's monitor. The best way is not to find taxes. What is happening now at this point of time? People are moving out of India. People are trading from Dubai and various other countries at this point of time. So that's not a good signal, So I think if you ask me, regulation is the basic point where everything boils down to.
Okay, Prashant, coming back to what Meghna in fact mentioned to at the start, also how the products that increasingly now we are talking about the ownership and the way the patterns have emerged. What is it that is driving the crypto market in India, and how do you see the market here being different perhaps from the global shades? Is there anything that stands out when we talk about the cryptocurrencies, the way it is dealt with in India and the Indian market itself?
Yeah. I think a lot of ways. To understand how this has been working in India, we need to understand the history of the Indian financial markets, right? Like if you look at the Indian financial markets, traditionally and even today, though there are laws, but it's not really been progressive compared to any other markets. I mean, the investors really have, a lot of boundaries when it comes to investment, trading, and things like that. And if you look at the general common people, they don't have investment to assets which are like accessible to institutional and recognized investors. And with cryptos, what has essentially happened is that it has given the people of freedom to invest into asset class which is accessible by everyone freely. The second important thing here is that this industry and this market not only give people an opportunity to invest, but also gave opportunity to people to build their own ecosystems and own projects. So essentially, you could say that it empowered communities to build their own ideologies around the internet, which is the, launching their own tokens and, things like that. While there has been a lot of bad actors, but also there has been good actors like, Matic, Polygon, which actually emerged as one of the leading infrastructure or the blockchain companies in India. And also most of the largest, India has been also the home to the largest developer community in the world, and also the skilled developer communities in the world. So blockchain as a technology is a complete open source technology. It gives immense powers to creators and to developers to build ideologies which is actually required to drive the internet. And also the third important thing is that for technocrats, if we understand the history of the internet, right, the idea of the internet was the freedom of information, right? And that's been actually getting lost. But with the blockchain and the cryptocurrency, the idea was the freedom of money, right? Like one could have the own power or control over the money and to, move freely over the blockchain and to kind of bypass all those traditional routes. So these few things have been like really pretty interesting, which has actually drive the way. The fourth important thing is that uh, the returns, the kind of returns which this industry has generated. I mean, if you look at from the Indian investors' perspective, right, due to a lot of various capital restrictions and not having enough foreign reserves, Indians are essentially not allowed to invest in lot of asset class in the US, Europe, UK, China, etc., etc., etc. And we have actually missed, might be investing in next Facebook, next Netflix, or things like that. But with cryptos, the things been been totally different, right? People really got, or people really wanted to invest into asset class so they don't miss upon the next wealth generating of opportunities. And this is where also people are really attracted, because cryptocurrencies traditionally have been the best performing asset class in like past decade. And this also drives a lot of people to invest, because we see a lot of stories, while some of them are fraud, where a lot of people have converted their 100 rupees into some few lakhs and crores. So these few things have also attracted a lot of people to be part of this industry. So this is my take on how why India's ecosystem been thriving and growing.
Before I progress further, I think at this point in time, Prashant, I would like you to also talk about the FTX crash that has happened, because this is obviously something that people are talking about. What kind of vulnerabilities has this exposed? And then I will go back, in fact, to Prashant and to Dr. Qureshey and Meghna to talk about the regulations from the India perspective.
Yeah, so I think the very interesting thing about the FTX is been it has not only raised an alarm on the cryptocurrencies, but also the traditional financial world. Meaning that if you don't have access to your money, or you don't control the money, and you just let your money lie in control of some centralized entity or party, you could potentially end up losing all of it. And traditionally, this has also happened a lot, even in India, right? Like last year, there was one of the banks based out of Pune, which got actually, hacked, and one of the guys were able to, withdraw several cash from the ATMs. A lot of users' account got freeze. We have seen the things which has happened with the Yes Bank, right? People were unable to withdraw their savings, and we have seen a lot of several such stories, even with the traditional financial systems as well. With FTX, the thing is that it was quite simple to execute, because the everything lies all over the internet, and the FTX controlled the users' money and billions of dollars of money. Not only that, but also what essentially FTX did was that they also manipulated the market. So meaning they used the users' money to trade against them. So to give you an example, right? If you look at exchanges today, let it be NSE, BSE, or your brokers, they potentially know or have access to all the trade information which is being done on the platform. So meaning, let's say there's a potential trade of like, let's say $1 million, and let's assume that $700,000 out of that is on the long side and $300,000 is on the short side. So that gives exchanges or these centralized platforms or the broker houses to get access to the data on how the market is moving. And they could use that information to their advantage to trade against the users without even they knowing it. So let's say if I have to just wipe all the $700,000, what all I have to do is just, maybe take some leverage and, place a short position against your $700,000, which means the every single time a user would trade, he would potentially keep on losing money. So what FTX did was that they not only kind of kind of had access to this information, but they also traded against the users. The third thing is that they also kind of did a very well marketing, right? They got into like Super Bowls, NFLs. They did everything primarily in the US and in the Western worlds to be that go-to brand in the industry. And that also draws me a comparison even into the today's financial worlds, right? Like actually, though we have so much regulations, I mean, we have to remember that FTX was a very highly regulated entity that was regulated by CFST, New York Financial Services Department. It was regulated by SEC, Commodities Commission, etc., so on and so forth. And still they were able to kind of, pull that off. It was kind of similar to Bernie Madoff's scam of 2008, where he's been successfully running like an investment hedge fund for past 30 years. So though we have several regulations in place, the biggest challenge is the control of the centralized bodies or entities or people in the space or in the ecosystem. That can or that is also being seen into the traditional financial world or institutions as well, right? Like if you see the financial structure of India, we have a lot of kinds of banks. We have nationalized banks, we have cooperative banks, and the concern could also lie with a lot of cooperative banks on how they would be using the users' money at the end of the day, and a lot of brokerage houses on how they use the money. We have seen Carvi scam and things like that. So,
let me get in, Meghna, here on this, because you are raising a lot of interesting, of course, examples too. But Meghna, we often hear these comparisons that, look, there are issues also when you talk about the legal structure, the legal tenders, or also the traditional economic structures, be the banking systems, the other exchanges. Are these comparisons fair when you compare them with cryptos, with the virtual assets? What is the pitfall here of these kind of comparisons?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're useful from the standpoint of understanding what kinds of regulatory principles would apply to crypto. And I think that is where, their utility kind of starts and ends. And giving the example of FTX, while the US entity was regulated, the Bahamas entity was not. And if you look at all the information that's coming out, it's blatant kind of disregard in terms of its fiduciary duties, which should have been there, which would have been regulatorily enforced. Of course, scams happened even with SEBI. There was the algorithmic trading scam that has just been unearthed, I think, in 2016. So it's not. We're not talking about the infallibility of regulatory institutions. Of course, there will be things that fall through, but at the end of the day, there is a safety net for consumers when there is regulation. There is a claim that they can make to an asset that they own if, for example, like in the case of FTX, the exchange has carried out or has been really irresponsible and it blows up. There are guardrails for these entrepreneurs, these tech entrepreneurs that are getting into finance, to show them exactly what can be done and cannot be done. And that's why, there is a push for regulation, because ultimately, if you look at crypto, it's just another asset that people want to trade and they want to engage in. And the only way forward, it's not going to stop, because there is still plenty of scope for you to just trade offshore, even if you don't want to deal with exchanges in India. What happens is people will just go to an exchange that operates globally and trade from there. So you can't stop this activity unless, this EFM said this as well, that there is global regulation, but you also have to incentivize onshoring of activities so that as much as possible, the trading activity is carried out through entities that can fall under your purview, that you can regulate. And so from that perspective, if you look at, the tax or punitive measures like the tax and the 1% TDS, etc., they have only really encouraged offshoring of this activity, right? Volumes may be down, but it's not uncertain as to where those volumes have gone. It's not certain that they have ceased completely. And at the end of the day, the biggest losers are the consumers, because they will engage in more risky investing activity, and they have no real claims to any funds that they own.
Yeah, I think that is at the bottom line of the entire problem, that, when you have no real claims. Dr. Qureshey, and Puneet Kumar, in fact, is also asking us. I'm trying to take in some audience questions now because our chat box seems to be buzzing. Puneet is asking you, do you think dealing in cryptocurrency is safer and reliable in a country like India, where there is no regulation in cyber law? And, we've heard the Prime Minister also say this time and again, along with the Finance Minister, that a global uniform approach on cryptocurrencies is needed. Steps by just one nation will not be sufficient. So how do you really think about a regulatory framework, because given the fact that it will be so difficult to bring about a consensus on the global stage on this? Could you unmute yourself, please?
Answering that question, I feel, see, the framework is very important, as everyone was talking about supporting regulations. When Prashant was talking, I would like to add up another example. What happened when Mt. Gox, a Tokyo-based cryptocurrency exchange, collapsed, after a theft of 850,000 Bitcoins. That was a massive beast. That was not a joke. But what happened was, the country only tightened its regulation. So if you ask me today, what the industry and the experts say that is time and again, you need to adapt with having proper KYCs. I mean, strict KYC norms are very important. Dealing in Indian exchanges, of course, they are very secured. I feel there are a lot of users which needs to be aware. I was talking to a couple of exchanges that you should develop certain kind of small awareness videos, how to do a small kind of exchange. How do you register? How do you download an app? And how do you start, buying certain cryptocurrencies, of various things, like not only necessarily Bitcoin, they could be Ethereum, they could be Dogecoin, they could be anything else. And one is, strict KYC norms. Then there should be a pattern of reporting. And of course, you should not impose heavy taxes like 30% and so on and so forth. With a minuscule level of taxes, things can be sorted out. What I think the country as India is worried about is the misuse of the cryptocurrency. Specifically, when you talk about national security, yes, to an extent. But as Meghna was telling me that the report of a very famous company organization called Chain Analysis, which said that it's only 2.1% of such funds have been misused for all these kind of activities. And then what is the sense? Why is government now introducing digital coin or digital currency at this point of time? There is some hue and cry in the market, but as I said, yes, it is very, very secured environment, and I would encourage everybody to start using, and it will strike back. I mean, it's going to be back. Just see the models adopted by countries like Russia. You talk about Japan, talk about Australia. They have regulated cryptocurrencies. They did not say that you should not deal with cryptocurrencies. Now, several such countries.
Are you saying, Dr. Qureshey, that there is a exaggerated brouhaha around the security concerns, particularly when it comes to terror financing, when it comes to using crypto for black money funding? Because these are the points that are constantly being flagged by the RBI, by security agencies. Every time there is some case being made advocating that there should be a ban on crypto.
If you repeat the question, please. You were saying that what was that? I
Is
missed
it
it.
an exaggerated concern
It is
then, when it
exaggerated.
comes to the terror financing part of
It
crypto
is
being
over
used?
exaggerated, actually speaking. I mean, there's nothing as such, because there are global reports which says hardly 2%, 2.1% of the money is being used for all these various kinds of activities. So I don't think so. If you think it's that, then people who are trading in dollars, do you think dollars should be banned? No, that's not the answer. Do we have a framework? Do we have enough of security measures in the country? This is the first question everybody should think about. Yes, there is a very good security framework India has at this point of time. The government is investing a lot of money in cybersecurity. There are several FSLs which have been opened. There are a lot of police law enforcement agencies who have been hands-on trained on how do we combat these kind of new cyber crimes, especially on crypto forensics investigation. There are several tools and countermeasures which are currently being used. In fact, at the time of COVID-19, India has lost, there's a report which says more than $6 billion. I mean, the Chinese started giving the loan apps, which is a very famous scam which had happened. There were certain Chinese nationals who were arrested, but we cannot hold them more than 6 months due to the laws and things like that. But what we are currently facing is the expertise. That is what I could say. But the framework is also important, but the security of the exchanges are there. They are very secure. They are being timely tested, audited by several security organizations, and the frameworks are in place.
Meghna, would you agree with this assessment? Because, the framework is weak for sure. The framework needs, but does that also mean that the security concerns are exaggerated?
So from a primarily the concern that emanates from the RBI and I guess the MOF as well is that, we have a managed capital account, and that crypto will be used for money laundering, and it will be used to basically move capital out of the country. But like I said before, if you create conditions to encourage onshore trading of crypto and onshore activity, the chances of that movement happening are less, and the chances of you also create conditions to be able to surveil those channels a lot more clearly, because you will be imposing requirements and on local exchanges about transfers of value, even for instance in the case of, let's say, someone takes money from their custodial or exchange held wallet and moves it to a non-custodial wallet. You can put an obligation on an exchange to report that this person did that, etc., etc. It gives you it gives you a regular channel of information into this ecosystem. Whereas right now, what is really happening is this kind of ad hoc enforcement where you are enforcing first and then thinking about the law later. So you only have bits and pieces of the information in place, which is not really conducive to the objectives that the RBI or any other law enforcement agency, financial law enforcement agency would seek. I would think that they would want a consistent channel of information if this is a concern for them. And that can only really happen if you encourage activity to happen onshore and you kind of build a bit of trust, build a channel of information through the exchanges that are currently located in this country. And you can only do that through regulation.
Okay, Prashant, let me bring in fact, an audience question here. There is Krishna who's asking, is there a strong stable coin in the crypto market which will resemble the US dollar accurately?
Yeah, I think the USDC circle is one of those stable coins, which I would say, because that's backed by very strong financial institutions, FDIC approved, and there's another called Paxos or BUSD. So even Paxos is a NYFS regulated entity. So these two are really good stable coins, and also there's been a lot of buzz that United States or the Fed itself will launch their own CBDC, central bank digital currency. So we're going to see that soon as well. So yeah, there are a couple of stable coins which are like quite good in my personal opinion. But again, I would like to make a disclaimer that it shouldn't be taken as a financial advice.
There's also one other question that Dheeraj asks, saying that Bitcoin seems to be the true inspiration of the market's cryptocurrencies, and it appears that blockchain technology has influenced India since CBDC has been introduced by RBI. What is the point of it when we already have UPI?
Actually, honestly, my opinion around CBDC is quite different because I can talk from insider perspective. The most important thing is that the RBI really wants to reduce its dependence on US dollars and primarily the SWIFT network, right? So today, if any international, I mean, you have seen US how they impose sanctions on countries and remove them from the SWIFT network, because when you're removed from the SWIFT network, you really can't do any transaction. So meaning whatever dollars lying in your capital accounts are just waste because you cannot move it around anymore. So with CBDCs, India is essentially looking to create its own network of transactions or our own network of international financial infrastructure. The second thing is that with CBDCs, it gives the power of RBI to eliminate a lot of middlemen in every single transactions. If you look at the international trade and how the transaction and the settlement works on the international trade, you would essentially see that RBI really has very opaque view on how the transactions being carried out by the intermediaries such as banks, because banks are really not transparent, and specifically I'm talking about the international banks because they lie beyond the control and the jurisdiction of RBI. So with CBDC, it gives the power back to RBI to actually track the complete flow in the transaction. The third important thing is that also the power of smart contracts. So we all know that how powerful smart contracts are. We have seen the way it works brilliantly with Ethereum, DeFi, and so many things, right? So with smart contracts, one could basically, create transactions where the contracts would be executed without any dependencies on any of these middlemen like banking institutions, insurance, or etc., etc. And the transactions will auto settle. So the overall cost of managing a particular transaction would get reduced drastically, and that would have a very big impact. And the most important thing which I highlighted in my point number one is that the objective of India and RBI is to create their own financial infrastructure which is independent of SWIFT and any other network, because using CBDCs and blockchain at its core would also give a lot of security, a lot of scalability, and also a lot of privacy in a fact that the RBI can decide who the parties should be involved in that particular transaction. So that is also kind of favorable from a national security perspective. Hence, they would go after CBDCs. But there are certain downside as well with CBDCs because the overall privacy of how you should or one should potentially use your money is lost. And there's been some news recently I read where China issued a CBDC with an expiry date. So meaning now your money would also have an expiry date too. So government can use that to potentially drive consumption and force people to spend rather than to, kind of save. So, but overall, looking at the advantages side, I think it's quite a brilliant step, and it could actually help India in a lot of ways.
There's actually a related question to that, Dr. Qureshey, if you want to come in on it, because Jayesh is asking, how can cryptocurrency with limited supply help in reducing inflation? The second question that I would like to ask you is that you mentioned multiple cryptocurrencies. I just read an article that said that it's really increasingly being accepted in the luxury world. Yachts are being bought, fashion, watches, hospitality. Is there again an area of concern from a security perspective with such high-end transactions happening on it? Unmute yourself, please.
I leave the first question to Prashant. The second one, yes. There's several organizations globally, and there are several countries globally which have regulated cryptocurrency in trading, in buying luxury goods. In fact, talk about Tesla has introduced this of late to trade, to buy their vehicles online and on cryptocurrencies. When back in the days when you talk about cryptocurrency, I think we are too late. We are still in a discussion stage. Actually, I think India is, we are too late in this. First of all, way back in 2010 itself, in the US, in Silicon Valley, I've seen several machines like ATMs you have for crypto. You can buy, you can sell, you can do anything over there. But India is taking time. That's how I started saying that we lack basic infrastructure, awareness, regulation, framework, security to an extent. But coming back to I'm saying that there's no hue and cry in buying those items online, and I think I would encourage people to come. There'll be a time when government, just mark my words, there'll be time when government, they are trying to ready the infrastructure. Suddenly one fine day, or probably in this parliament session, they would say, hey, RBI is coming with its own cryptocurrency. Or sometime you'll find Reliance or Adani Group coming with their own cryptocurrency. This is what I feel from my side of it, because there's a lot of preparation government of India is doing. They wanted certain existing exchanges or the cryptocurrency organizations not to sustain for a pretty long time, another side of it. But yes, I feel within another 6 months to 1 year, India will be back with a proper framework, proper regulation, and proper infrastructure for trading on cryptocurrency. There'll be time where everything over the period of time will be traded on crypto exchanges. So I feel I encourage, yes, it is positive.
Before I go back to Prashant to clarify on Jayesh's question, Meghna, would you like to come in on this? What is the conversation that you're picking up from policymakers that you're interacting with, from lawmakers in particular, out of the winter session of Parliament? And there's also a question from Asal Law that what could be a possible research gap in crypto finance, or can be related with fintech and crypto finance for research, if you could answer that as well.
So I'll let Prashant and Dr. Qureshey answer the question on crypto finance. But in terms of movements on this, India was very clear about using G20 as a means to regulate or driving some consensus towards the regulation of crypto. Whether that position is changed, I'm unaware, but that was the last position that they had taken, that they would use their presidency and the forum to drive global consensus on this subject.
Yeah, I think it's been called the unfinalized priority, and that's a question that Indranuj also wanted to ask in terms of the G20's role around the crypto framework.
Yeah, so if you look at the G20, a lot of countries within it are either moving towards regulation or have regulated this space. So it really is about establishing a mechanism for inter-regulatory cooperation that works. There have been, of course, efforts towards this in the past. We have the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, which has failed on account of multiple reasons. It is too complex, it is too cumbersome and time consuming, etc., etc. So, but I think that over here you have the profound advantage of a heavily technological ecosystem, one that is incentivized to create technological solutions that enable the cross-border governance of this space, because trust, or you would assume that, though I think that's a harder case to make after the FTX law, but because trust is something that is of value to entrepreneurs in the system as well, right? Because at the end of the day, they are managing someone's money. So from that perspective, there are solutions that have been developed. For instance, there is the travel rule, which is one of the standards for virtual asset and financial governance as well, that the Financial Action Task Force has come up with, which essentially says that a crypto exchange must have the information, personally identifiable information of both the originator of a transaction as well as the beneficiary. And so that would entail having an equivalent, a consistent amount, consistent standard of data across the world on people who engage with exchanges. And so governments would have to play a role in that. But there are technological solutions that are working towards enabling the travel rule and enabling compliance with it.
Okay. Prashant, going back to that question, you had cited the example from China, and Jayesh asked a similar question in terms of cryptocurrency with limited supply. Can it actually help ease inflation?
Actually, there are various school of thoughts towards it. I mean, if you look at the fundamental principles of money, like it has to be scared, it has to be limited in supply, it has to be easily movable, it has to be divisible, and so on. So, to be honest, I personally feel that Bitcoin as an asset particularly kind of fills all those check boxes. And to understand this, we can move or dive towards the history, right? I mean, before 1970 or the exit of or the introduction of Bretton Woods system, we really had money which was backed by the gold. And the idea of a gold backed money was that the people's money should be inflation proof, and there has to be a real asset which is representing your money because it is really, really valuable and it's a form of exchange. So earlier, I mean, if you look at even the Indian currency or most of the currencies around the world, we really had any FX exposures because of the fact that most of the currencies were backed by gold. So they all traded more or likely at the similar value. But when the President Nixon, introduced the Bretton Woods system, where he scrapped the United States dollar to be redeemable against gold, which means the US essentially took all the gold from everyone around the world, it actually triggered or it gave more power to the Feds in terms of how they would potentially control the money. So even today, if you look at the most of the ups and downs in the market, the inflation and how is it being controlled, it's purely my personal belief is that by manipulation of interest rate and trying to control the supply of the money. But overall, the impact which is having on the developing economies and the currencies like India, a lot of other countries like Africa, and then I mean I would say more than even the Europe, right? Like the currency is being falling at a very fast rate because the financial institutions are being able to control the prices of potential every currency. Now with Bitcoin, recently, just about a couple of months back, there was a paper in the White House where they mentioned that the America could potentially use cryptocurrencies to their advantage and to increase their financial denomination. Now, if you look at Bitcoin, right, one of the good advantages Bitcoin is that you could potentially trade Bitcoin and convert it to any currency around the world. So let it be dollars, euros, etc., so on and so forth. So even today, for people in sanctioned countries like Venezuela or a lot of parts of Africa, it plays a very vital role because they have access to dollar-backed money and they are not dependent on United States to give them access to that. All they are dependent is on the internet and the computational power to mine that money. Second thing is movability, right? I mean, where the banking infrastructure has been a challenge, it becomes very important for you to at least have access to some basic human needs, right? Like good education and things like that. So Bitcoin solved that purpose. And if you go and see the report, several Nigerians and in several African countries are actually using cryptocurrencies to move money or to remit money in a more and much efficient way. And the third most important thing is the supply. I mean, the supply is like clearly visible. The algorithmic, which is mathematically powered, is so amazing that when the more people comes to mine a particular amount of currency or the particular amount of Bitcoin, the network difficulty would increase, and meaning that you would be able to mine less, and the cost of which is deployed to mine that particular currency is increased. Now, if you compare that with gold, this is exactly like gold, right? The gold is valuable because the gold is scarce. It takes a lot of human, financial, and a lot of other forms of energy capital to extract that gold out, to process it, ship it, etc., etc. Right? There is really a cost of production. But if you look at the fiat money, which is the today's money, it's being just printed on debt, and it is driving a lot of economies into debt if it's not managed properly. So my personal opinion is that, of course, in the long term, it can help solve a lot of inflation problem. But realistically, the asset class right now is very, very speculative. and we are still far away from reaching that maturity level in that particular curve.
Yeah, I think that's kind of looking a lot into the future. But, I just have a last couple of minutes. I'll try and squeeze in some more questions. Dr. Qureshey, Prashant had mentioned about that, how, of course, there are bad apples in India also, but there are more good apples. Do you sort of concur with that opinion, with what has been happening with, say, for instance, a Coin DCX, a WazirX, and, they've been making the news for all the wrong reasons of late. Really, are you worried about, what is the kind of loopholes that really need to be plugged at this point in time?
Well, I totally agree with Prashant. At this point of time, the basic thing required for everything of running, the backbone of it is basically the regulation. Until unless there is no crypto regulation, which needs to get enacted in the parliament, and then followed by the data protection bill. I'll give you one more example of how things happen globally. How do countries and continents adapt these kind of new disruptive technologies? I mean, you just can't, get up one fine morning and say, yeah, let's migrate to 5G. It takes a huge effort to migrate from a 4G to a 5G network. I'm sure everybody is aware of that. And there are several implications for it too. It takes at least 6 months to 1 year. And a country the size of India, the kind of population India has, it takes humongous time for the entire nation to migrate from a 4G to 5G. Coming back to security, yes, there needs to be regulation first. Second, let's take an example of the General Data Protection Regulation Act, which the European Union has passed. It was in the year 2018 when Mark Rutte visited India to sign an agreement with our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But what happened was it took almost 10 years for European Union to run through it, to ensure that the General Data Protection Regulation is passed. The entire European Union is ready for everything to adapt that kind of thing. And there are certain penalties. For instance, if you don't comply with it, for instance, if there is any breach which is happening, and if you don't report, there is some kind of penalty towards it, either by paying certain amount of profits the company makes, and there's a liability, you have to come out and declare. But do you think this kind of process happens here? Not at all. So again, coming back to it is the framework. Again, coming back to the basics is nothing but regulation. Once these two things are in place, I think then everything will be certain about moving forward for the people to start trading. People are trading at this point of time with security. Okay. Instances do happen globally and in India also. Doesn't mean that people should stop for it. There is every such organization. There's no such organization in the world which is not penetrated or hacked. That happens because technology is like it's a process. Every organization needs to be abreast of what's happening. Next second, next minute, you don't know what is the kind of severity level a company is standing, and what kind of new hack attacks happen. And I think there's a long journey. Again, we all have to patiently wait, adapt to it. And then India, I'm sure the government is doing its job, but it'll take certain more time for everything to be in place.
Okay. Meghna, a quick question. Dheeraj has bombarded our chat box with a couple of questions. He wants to know, what is the issue with cryptocurrency valuation? If the valuation is truly speculative, why are individuals still purchasing or mining cryptocurrency, including Harvard University? Is that a question you would like to take?
I can't really speak on valuation. I'm a lawyer.
Okay, I'll take that. But, your sense, Meghna, what happens if India moves a regulatory framework, if India moves for a legislative ban on crypto?
Look, I don't think that a ban at this point is tenable. It'll just, like I said, lead to complete offshoring, and any scope of actually overseeing activity in terms of and managing threats in terms of whether it's terror finance, whether it is threats to financial stability through, the violation of foreign exchange management rules or money laundering, it'll be a complete black box that they'll be dealing with. So I don't think a ban is likely or very practical. Bans typically don't work. We've tried it with gold, did not work. So I think really they need to work towards regulation, and really there is no political downside to regulation, because essentially you're putting guardrails in place. And in terms of having frameworks or having templates to regulate, you can't really throw up your hands and say, well, how do we do it? Because there are enough international bodies, regulatory bodies like the FSB, like IOSCO, like FATF, as well as national regulators across different countries that have brought out templates that seem to be working. And from the standpoint of foreign exchange management, which is the kind of defense that certain regulators put up over here, that India is different from all these countries, we have a managed capital account. Again, it's not that difficult to adapt FEMA to a new asset class. It's been done before, and there is a provision for it underneath under FEMA itself, about for notification. And even if you don't want to notify crypto as a currency, you can notify it as something else, but bring out some kind of clarity rather than engaging in this ad hoc kind of enforcement mindset, which is not really allowing you to do your job fully, not giving consumers any kind of confidence, and kind of pushing them offshore, and not really doing any service for your entrepreneurs as well, right? Who have invested a lot of energy and money and etc. in this. So
okay. Just the last set questions. Prashant, would you like to come in on the question by Dheeraj on the issue of cryptocurrency valuation?
Yeah, I think most of the assets been commoditized. I mean, even if you look at energy today, it's been commoditized and speculative. Valuation is kind of proportional to the market sentiments and what people actually believe in. So there is no fair way to actually derive at the valuation metrics, but in the industry, we use several methodologies to define the valuation of the cryptocurrency, depending on its usability, the amount of network fees it generate, or the mining activity, and purely based on the community. So the valuation in the crypto space is mostly derived by the number of people using it, the fees the network is generating, how big is the community, right? And these are the parameters. And I think as an industry, it purely depends on the utility of the crypto assets and how widely they are actually accepted. So there is really no thumb rule or formula that to arrive at a valuation. And also it is also derived by how people believe in one particular thing. It is also like kind of shares, though there is a lot of P metrics and stuff like that, but also people would believe in certain things far more than its valuation basis.
Okay. Monica has a question. Dr. Qureshey, if you would like to take this. Some state governments have already implemented blockchain-based projects that do not require cryptocurrency. Then why do we need cryptocurrency?
I mean, if you see crypto, without blockchain, there's no cryptocurrency. I mean, it's like driving a car without a fuel. So it goes hand in hand. So yes, it is a state's affair. Everybody is now coming out with their digital currencies. India has a digital rupee recently launched. Obviously, over the period of time, every country will come out with its own digital currency. So I think it's just a matter of time where payment systems like UPI, I mean, you cannot even again say that that's the great system we have. We cannot replace that with digital. So there's a lot of confusion internally within the government at this point of time. We are trying to ensure that we are trying all ways and means. So India, I'm sure, can come up with its own regulation, amazing regulation. Seeing several other countries as case studies, we can come out with our own regulation. And it's a state's affair, yes, where even as you can see that Telangana as the newborn state was the first state to come out with a cyber security policy, and also on electronic vehicles and several other such policies. So yes, a state can also have its own currency running, their own exchanges. Yeah, why not? I mean, India is a large country. There's a very large scope for it. Yes.
Meghna, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah. So how I look at cryptocurrency is kind of the key to open innovation, right? Essentially, if you have an open crypto ecosystem, like you have an ecosystem like Ethereum or even Polygon, to go and build on those ecosystems, you just need to acquire a little bit of either Ethereum or Matic, and then you start building your apps. And from these systems that facilitate this open innovation, we've seen the flourishing of multiple decentralized apps, right? A world without cryptocurrency would essentially kind of mirror what we see in Web2 today, where there's a lot of concentration of certain entities. They operate as gatekeepers, and there are concentration risks that emanate from that. So, for instance, if I'm a company that runs a certain blockchain application, would I let you as a startup, if you have a competing protocol or a competing product, onto my platform? No, I wouldn't, right? So cryptocurrency is integral from an open innovation perspective. I don't think we should look at it in terms of, oh, there are applications that exist, so why do we need it? We need it because it democratizes innovation.
Prashant, I'll just end the conversation with the last word from you. Your sense of, as you're watching the statements, you've seen the government statements on FTX. Did you think India is in a larger mood for a ban, or it will just wait and watch?
No, my personal belief is that if they had to ban this thing, they would have just done it long back. I really don't think they would have given so much time to the industry. But however, considering how the scenarios been, evolving, India also needs to think from investor protection perspective. And today, India is home to one of the largest investor base in the crypto assets. So I really don't think that ban would be an option, but they would possibly try to discourage people by putting in unfavorable laws like a 1% TDS and taxations and so on and so forth, like how they have been doing it with the tobacco and other industry.
Okay, I think that's a interesting note to end this conversation with. Also, because keeping in mind, recently we had the UN counterterrorism dialogue that New Delhi was hosting, and cryptocurrencies was a large part of the conversation when it came to channelizing money for illicit purposes. But there seems to be a consensus among all our panelists this evening that if you try and ban crypto, it kind of creates, as Meghna put it, saying that it creates a black box kind of a situation. As Dr. Zaki Qureshey suggested, that you cannot be throwing out the baby with the bath water. I'm sure if we had somebody from the security setup here, there might be a differing opinion. And I did try, in fact, getting in somebody, but unfortunately we had scheduling issues. But I'm sure this is a conversation that will continue to generate a lot of debate. And of course, it's something that is of interest. But for now, I'm hoping that all of us who, all the attendees also who came in, thank you for your questions, for being a part of this webinar. And thanks so much to all of you for joining in Let's Talk Policy at the Kautilya School of Public Policy.